You lean in close to someone this morning. You catch a whiff of your own breath first. You reach for the mint. You reach for the toothbrush. You assume this is a modern problem born from coffee and processed sugar and a world that never stops eating. But the real answer is far stranger. Your ancestors dealt with breath you can barely imagine. And in some strange ways, they had less of a problem than you do. Start with the obvious question. What did a mouth even look like 60,000 years ago? No toothbrush. No mint. No dentist. Surely it was a disaster in there. Rotting food. Bacteria running wild. A smell that could clear a cave. That is the story you have probably absorbed without ever questioning it, passed down through cartoons of grunting, snaggle-toothed cavemen. It is only half true, and the other half is far more interesting than the cartoon. Here is where the story actually gets interesting. Researchers who study ancient teeth do not rely on guesswork. They rely on a substance called dental calculus, the hardened plaque that builds up on teeth over a lifetime and fossilizes right there in the jaw. It traps everything. Food particles, bacteria, even tiny fragments of plants that a person chewed decades before dying. Anthropologist Christina Warner has spent years extracting DNA from this ancient calculus, treating it almost like a sealed time capsule glued to the enamel. What she found inside changed how scientists think about the ancient mouth entirely. The bacteria were there. That part is true. Your mouth today hosts hundreds of species of bacteria, and so did theirs. But the balance was different. Modern mouths are dominated by bacteria that thrive on sugar and refined starch, the kind of bacteria that produce sharp, sour, foul-smelling byproducts. Ancient mouths, especially before the rise of farming, hosted a different mix entirely. Fewer sugar lovers. More of the species that break down fibrous plants and raw meat. Different fuel. Different bacteria. Different smell. Think about what that actually means for a moment. Bad breath is not really about dirt. It is about diet. It is a chemical reaction, not a hygiene failure. The compounds that make breath smell foul are called volatile sulfur compounds, and they form when specific bacteria break down specific foods, especially proteins and sugars trapped between the teeth. Change the food, and you change the chemistry in the mouth. Change the chemistry, and you change the smell. It sounds almost too simple to be true. But your mouth does not know the difference between a modern kitchen and a prehistoric riverbank. It only knows what you feed it. So picture a hunter-gatherer roughly 40,000 years ago. Her diet swings wildly by season. Roots and tubers in one stretch. Wild greens in another. Bursts of meat after a successful hunt, then long gaps with almost none. There is no steady stream of sugar coating her teeth day after day. There is no bread. There is no soda. Her bacteria simply do not have the fuel that modern breath-ruining bacteria depend on. Her breath, most of the time, is probably closer to neutral than you would expect. Not minty. Not fresh in the way an advertisement would promise. Just quiet, chemically speaking, because nothing is feeding a bacterial feast in there. But do not picture a fairy tale either. There is a twist coming, and it is not a pleasant one. Anthropologist Karen Hardy has examined dental calculus from Neanderthal sites and found something that complicates the clean, natural picture. Some ancient populations show clear signs of periodontal disease, the kind of gum infection that produces a genuinely rotten smell. Worn enamel from chewing tough, gritty food. Abscesses that would have caused real pain and real odor. No dentist to fix a cracked molar. No antibiotic to calm an infected gum. When something went wrong in an ancient mouth, it often stayed wrong, sometimes for years, sometimes for the rest of a person's life. Here is the strange part. The bad breath of an ancient human was not really about neglect. It was about damage. Grit from stone-ground grain wore teeth down to the pulp, one meal at a time, year after year. Using teeth as tools to soften hides or grip cordage or strip bark, cracked enamel that was never meant to take that kind of stress. Once a crack forms, bacteria move in, and once bacteria move in, decay follows a very old and very consistent path. An infected tooth 40,000 years ago behaved exactly the way an infected tooth behaves today. The difference is that today you can walk into a clinic and have it removed in an afternoon. Consider what this looked like in practice, tooth by tooth. Ancient molars recovered from Paleolithic sites often show a pattern researchers call heavy occlusal wear, meaning the biting surface of the tooth is ground down flat, sometimes almost to the root, decades before old age would explain it on its own. That wear did not come from sugar rotting the enamel away softly from the outside. It came from grit. Stone tools used to grind seeds and roots left behind tiny mineral particles that stayed mixed into the food, and every bite ground those particles directly against the tooth surface. Imagine chewing sand quietly, meal after meal, for an entire lifetime. Eventually, the enamel simply wears through, exposing the softer dentin underneath, and once that layer is exposed, decay and infection move in far more easily than they would through a fully protected tooth. This is a completely different mechanism from the cavities you might get today from candy or soda. Same outcome, a damaged and possibly foul-smelling tooth, but an entirely different cause. Now bring in a third line of evidence, because breath is not only shaped by teeth. It is shaped by the entire digestive system, and that means gut bacteria matter just as much as mouth bacteria. Researcher Alan Cooper has studied how the human oral and gut microbiome shifted dramatically with the invention of agriculture. Before farming, the mix of bacteria living in and on the human body was remarkably diverse. After farming took hold, something changed. Diets narrowed. A small handful of starchy staple crops, wheat, barley, rice, began to dominate meals day after day, year after year, meal after meal. That shift mattered enormously. Starch breaks down into sugar. Sugar feeds specific bacteria strains, the same strains linked to plaque, cavities, and sulfur-heavy breath. So paradoxically, farming, the invention that is often framed as civilization's great leap forward, may have made human breath measurably worse. Stable food supply, settled villages, steady population growth, and quietly a mouthful of bacteria that thrived on the very grain that made the whole system possible. Does that surprise you? It should. The image most people carry is backward. Cavemen with rotten teeth, modern humans with clean smiles thanks to civilization. The research tells something closer to the opposite. Some of the worst dental decay in the archaeological record shows up after agriculture begins, not before it. Skeletons from early farming communities in the Fertile Crescent and later across Europe show tooth decay rates far higher than skeletons from hunter-gatherer populations that came before them. Civilization did not rescue the human mouth. In a very real sense, civilization is one of the reasons your mouth needs rescuing in the first place. There is a modern echo of this ancient pattern that makes the whole picture click into place. In the 20th century, a dentist named Weston Price traveled to remote communities around the world that still ate diets close to their traditional roots, largely untouched by refined sugar and white flour. He documented something striking. Populations eating traditional whole food diets showed dramatically lower rates of cavities and gum disease than populations that had recently adopted a Western diet high in sugar and processed grain, even when hygiene tools were sparse or non-existent by modern standards. His work has been debated and refined by later researchers, and it should not be treated as the final word. But it lines up almost perfectly with what the ancient dental calculus shows. The problem was never the absence of a toothbrush. The problem then and now is what ends up between the teeth in the first place. So where does that leave the smell itself? Somewhere in between the two extremes you probably imagined. Not fresh and clean like a toothpaste commercial. Not a nonstop nightmare either. A varied, changing, deeply personal thing, shaped by whatever a person happened to eat that week, whatever infection they happened to be fighting that year, whatever damage their teeth had accumulated over a lifetime of chewing things you would never put in your mouth. Bark. Sinew, grit-laced roots pulled straight from the dirt. A mouth is a record of a life, and every ancient mouth told a slightly different story. There is also a detail that rarely makes it into the popular version of this story. Ancient people were not oblivious to the problem. Evidence from multiple archaeological sites shows early forms of dental care stretching back further than most people assume. Chew sticks, frayed at one end to work like a crude brush, appear in the archaeological record from ancient Egypt and Babylon, some dating back nearly 5,000 years. Some cultures used twigs from specific trees, chosen because their sap had a natural antibacterial effect, a fact they could not have explained scientifically but clearly understood through trial and repetition. Ash and crushed eggshell were sometimes mixed into early cleaning pastes, an improvised abrasive to scrub away buildup. None of this was scientific. None of it came with a dentist recommendation. But it shows something important. The discomfort of a foul mouth, and probably the social discomfort of foul breath, is old enough that humans have been quietly fighting it for thousands of years, long before anyone understood why it happened. Which brings up a question worth sitting with. Did ancient people even care about bad breath the way you do? It is tempting to assume they simply did not notice that life was too hard, too focused on survival, for anyone to worry about something as small as how their mouth smelled. But that assumption says more about modern bias than ancient reality. Humans are social animals. Closeness matters. Trust matters. Whispering, sharing food, sitting shoulder to shoulder around a fire, all of it happens at close range. A mouth that reeked of infection was not just uncomfortable for its owner. It was noticeable to everyone nearby. There is no reason to think ancient humans were immune to that same instinctive discomfort you feel when you catch a bad smell from someone standing close to you today. In fact, some researchers have gone further, suggesting that breath and body odor may have quietly shaped social bonds long before language gave humans the words to talk about it. Smell is one of the oldest senses in evolutionary terms, wired directly into the brain's emotional centers. A foul smell was not just unpleasant. It may have functioned as a warning signal, an unconscious cue that something was wrong, an infection, an illness, a wound that needed attention. Long before germ theory existed, the nose may have been doing a version of the same job a doctor does today. Now flip the lens back onto you, standing in front of a bathroom mirror with a toothbrush in your hand. Your morning breath is not a modern failure. It is an ancient chemical process running exactly the way it has run for tens of thousands of years, just fed by a very different diet than the one your distant ancestors relied on. Bacteria break down what you feed them overnight while saliva production slows and the mouth grows still and warm, the perfect condition for sulfur compounds to build. The smell you notice first thing in the morning is a direct echo of a process that has been happening in human mouths since long before anyone thought to name it. What has actually changed is not the biology. It is the diet and it is the tools. You eat more sugar in a single day than a hunter-gatherer might have encountered in an entire season. You also have fluoride, floss, mouthwash, and a dentist on speed dial, tools no ancient human ever had access to. In a strange way, you are fighting a battle your ancestors barely had to fight using weapons they could not have imagined against an enemy their own diet rarely fed in the first place. There is one more layer worth pulling apart because it reframes the entire question one final time. Bad breath is often treated as purely a hygiene issue, something fixable with enough brushing and enough mint. But the deeper research on ancient mouths suggests something closer to an ecosystem question. Your mouth is not a static surface you clean. It is a living environment, home to hundreds of species competing for space and resources, and what you eat determines who wins that competition. Feed it sugar and starch constantly, and you are quietly voting for the bacteria that produce the worst smell. Feed it a more varied, less sugar-heavy diet, closer to what an ancient forager might have eaten, and you shift the balance of that ecosystem in your own favor. Consider, too, how differently ancient humans experience their own mouths compared to how you experience yours. There was no mirror to check for spinach caught between teeth. No stranger's polite hint. No small tin of mints kept in a pocket for emergencies. Feedback about your own breath in the ancient world likely came from something far more direct. A flinch. A step back. A shift in how close someone chose to sit. Communications about something as private and embarrassing as bad breath probably happened without a single word, through body language honed over a lifetime of reading other people's faces. There is also something worth noticing about how differently smell traveled through an ancient life compared to a modern one. Today, you might go an entire day speaking to people from a careful, polite distance, a desk apart, a screen apart, breath rarely an issue because closeness itself is rare. An ancient life offered no such buffer. People slept together in small shelters for warmth. They worked shoulder to shoulder butchering meat, weaving cordage, tending fires that needed constant close attention. Breath was not an occasional social risk you managed once or twice a day before a meeting. It was a constant, unavoidable part of every close relationship a person had every single day for an entire life. In that light, the fact that ancient humans developed any form of oral care at all, without knowing a single thing about bacteria or chemistry, looks less like a footnote and more like a quiet, persistent act of social survival. None of this means you should throw out your toothbrush and start chewing on twigs. Ancient teeth, remember, were also full of cracks, abscesses, and grit-worn enamel with no dentist in sight to fix any of it. Life expectancy in many ancient populations was shaped in part by exactly these kinds of untreated infections. A cracked molar that turned into a spreading abscess, an abscess that turned into something far more dangerous than bad breath alone. The goal here is not to romanticize the past. It is to notice how much of what feels like a personal failing, a private embarrassment you handle alone in front of a mirror, is actually the tail end of a very long evolutionary and cultural story. Diet shapes bacteria. Bacteria shape smell. That equation has not changed in tens of thousands of years. Only the ingredients have. It is worth sitting with how much of your daily routine, brushing, flossing, rinsing, chewing gum after lunch, exists specifically to fight a version of this ancient chemistry that your ancestors rarely had to fight in the same intensity. You are not weaker than they were. You are not less disciplined. You are simply surrounded by more sugar, more refined starch, more constant snacking than almost any human population in history has ever faced at once. Your mouth is doing exactly what a human mouth has always done. It is reacting to its environment. The environment just changed far faster than the biology inside your mouth ever could. So the next time you lean in close to someone and worry about your own breath, remember what that smell actually is. It is not dirt. It is not decay in the way you imagine it. It is chemistry running an old and familiar program, fed by whatever you happen to eat today. Somewhere in a cave 40,000 years ago, a version of that same chemistry was quietly happening inside another human mouth, shaped by roots and wild greens instead of coffee and sugar, producing a smell that was, in its own strange way, closer to natural than anything sold to you in a small plastic bottle today. You reach for the mint. Your ancestors reached for a twig or for nothing at all, because for most of human history, the mouth mostly took care of itself.